Imagine that you rescue a demon girl's life, and before you know it, you are constructing an entire loving family alongside her, and you even have a daughter together, and everything is peaceful and beautiful until your father-in-law passes away, and following his death, your wife undergoes a complete transformation, and she begins betraying you, and directly in front of your eyes, she takes the life of your own daughter, and then she frames you for the entire crime, beats you within an inch of your life, and leaves your broken body for a magical beast to consume, and as if that was not already enough, she looks you directly in the face and hurls the cruelest possible insults at you. So how did all of this actually unfold? Everything started 70 years ago when the world was turned completely upside down because mysterious craters suddenly materialized right in the middle of city streets, and nobody had any idea where they originated, but before long, enormous dungeons began forming all across the globe, and people were disappearing left and right, and humanity was thrown into utter panic, and the rifts kept expanding with an eerie blue glow pulsing from somewhere deep within them, and explorers equipped themselves with helmets and emergency lights and descended underground to investigate what was happening, and deep inside those dark dungeons, the workers uncovered something that would radically alter humanity's future, which were glowing crystals saturated with mana, and soon they discovered that this strange energy could artificially evolve humans, granting them abilities that would have seemed absolutely impossible before. And thanks to mana, humans eventually acquired the capacity to use magic and finally possessed a means to combat the monsters lurking inside the dungeons, and mages began employing incredibly powerful spells to battle colossal dragons dwelling in the depths, but magic alone proved insufficient because physical strength and martial arts became equally crucial, since surviving inside these deadly dungeons demanded every possible advantage you could obtain, and for adventurers willing to stake their lives down there, danger could strike at any instant because one wrong move could cost them everything. And then one massive dragon decided it was time to conclude the fight, and it opened its gigantic mouth and unleashed a terrifying torrent of fire powerful enough to reduce everything in its path to ash within seconds, and the warriors braced themselves as the blast came hurtling toward them, and the female mage immediately erected a mystical shield, desperately attempting to halt the attack, but after sensing the dragon's overwhelming might, she realized this creature was far too strong for her shield to withstand, and that was when Seishirou stepped forward and positioned himself directly in front of the entire group, ready to absorb the attack head-on, and the hooded girl stared at him in disbelief, wondering what he was planning to do when he was not even employing any magical defense. But Seishirou did not panic, and he calmly clenched his fist as an intense blue aura began gathering around it, and he channeled all of his mana into a single strike and then charged straight into the dragon's massive stream of fire, and instead of being blown away, Seishirou's mana-coated fist tore directly through the flames, and he continued pressing forward, pouring every ounce of his power into his arm, before suddenly unleashing a devastating uppercut directly at the gigantic dragon, and the impact was absolutely staggering because a massive shockwave erupted from the punch, tearing through the surrounding area and completely vaporizing the giant dragon. And the entire team simply stood there in total disbelief because the same attack that had seemed impossible to survive had just been erased by one man's absurd strength. And even the warrior could not believe what he had just witnessed, and he stared at Seishirou, struggling to comprehend how a young man could possess such immense raw power. Meanwhile, Seishirou simply turned around and began walking away as though he had not just saved everyone's lives, and the female mage quickly moved toward him and inquired where he was going after pulling off something that insane, and Seishirou turned around with a calm little smile and responded to the girl while everyone else remained standing there completely speechless, but then his expression abruptly turned cold, and he revealed that from this point forward, he had only one real objective, which was to destroy his own demon wife, and surrounded by an intimidating blue aura, Seishirou made it clear that nothing was going to stop him from following his own path, even if he had to do it alone. Now, 17 years earlier, we see a huge mystical door glowing inside an isolated cave, and suddenly, someone stepped through the shining portal, returning from another dimension after completing a dangerous mission, and it was Seishirou, and he was carrying a young Oni girl in his arms, and the girl looked fragile and terrified after everything she had been through, and the moment the old leader saw her, He rushed over in disbelief because he could scarcely believe his beloved daughter, Ruka, had finally been brought back alive, and Ruka immediately ran into her father's arms and apologized for making him worry so much during the dangerous rescue, and the old man hugged his daughter tightly before turning toward the young man who had saved her, and he asked for the boy's name, and Seishirou awkwardly introduced himself, and the elderly man then offered him whatever reward he desired, whether it was wealth or status or anything else. But Seishirou simply said he only did what anyone should have done, and that was when the old man made a shocking decision, because as a way of showing his eternal gratitude, Rigo offered Seishirou his own daughter's hand in marriage, and Seishirou was completely stunned, and he just stared at Ruka, clearly having no idea how to respond, and judging by Ruka's expression, she definitely was not expecting this either. But there was a reason people were so afraid of the Oni race, because their horns and glowing red eyes made them appear terrifying to ordinary humans, and at the same time, they were regarded as an elite class of humanity because they could afford incredibly expensive high-level mana implants. And the rule was simple because the more money you possessed, the stronger you became, and that created a massive gap in power and eventually divided society into brutal social classes, and Rigo's Shinki family stood near the very top, and they had become one of the most powerful conglomerates around, with enough influence to challenge even politicians, and Seishirou understood that an ordinary human like himself would not exactly have an easy time surviving in that elite world, so despite everything, he respectfully accepted the elder's offer, and Seishirou explained that the mana implant could only be performed once. But old Rigo did not let that change his mind because if anything, it only made him more determined to bring the two of them together, and holding Seishirou's hands firmly, Rigo explained that the conflict between humans and the Oni had gone on for far too long, and he then took Seishirou's hand and placed it together with Ruka's, hoping their marriage could finally put an end to the ancient hatred between the two sides, and with a hopeful smile, Rigo asked them to become a bridge between humans and the Oni and help create a new era where both races could finally live in peace. And that was how Seishirou ended up accepting the proposal and officially became a respected member of the Oni clan. But fitting into Oni society turned out to be an enormous challenge because the expectations placed on him were massive, and the pressure never seemed to let up, and whenever things got too difficult, though, his father-in-law Rigo was always there to support him and remind him not to give up. And over time, the two grew genuinely close, and what started as a strange marriage arrangement slowly turned into a real father and son bond built on trust and mutual respect, and meanwhile, things between Seishirou and Ruka seemed to be going perfectly, and then came even better news because Ruka was pregnant, and not long after, they welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the family, and suddenly the house was filled with laughter, smiles, and those little moments that made everything feel worth it, and for a while, they really were one happy family because Rigo happily played on the floor with his granddaughter while Seishirou and Ruka watched them, laughing together. But unfortunately, that happiness did not last forever because after many peaceful years, old Rigo passed away, leaving a massive hole in everyone's lives, and then on a rainy day, Seishirou waited outside the funeral service, confused and worried because Ruka was nowhere to be found, and he kept checking his phone, wondering where his wife had disappeared to, especially since she was missing during her own father's memorial, and after Rigo's death, Ruka's entire personality changed because she started going out every night and did not come home until early morning, and Seishirou was not the only one being pushed away because the moderate Oni who had supported Rigo's leadership also began distancing themselves, leaving Seishirou increasingly isolated from the rest of the clan, and as the tension inside the family kept getting worse, Seishirou did his best to protect his daughter while dealing with the constant pressure coming from the other members around him, and with all this going on, the violent conflict between humans and the Oni started spreading rapidly through the city streets. 6 months after his father-in-law's death, a violent storm rolled over the residents, creating a dark and deeply unsettling atmosphere, and then out of nowhere, 2 Oni guards burst into the house and forced Seishirou down onto the floor, and they did not explain a single thing, and Seishirou had no idea why he was suddenly being treated like a prisoner inside his own home, and he gritted his teeth, furious and completely confused about what was happening. And then Ruka walked through the doorway, and she slowly approached with a cold, vicious stare that instantly made the entire room feel even more threatening, and a cruel smirk spread across her face as she completely ignored Seishirou's desperate protests, and she stopped in front of him and looked down like he was nothing, and in a calm, mocking voice, Ruka told him that the situation was actually pretty simple, and then she casually leaned against another man's arm and dropped the bomb that she was filing for divorce, and apparently, she had already decided to live happily with her new partner, and Seishirou was crushed because he could only stare at them while the new guy looked down at him with a smug, victorious grin, showing absolutely zero respect, and Seishirou immediately recognized him as Kuki Shishio, a powerful and dangerous heir from a rival Oni family, and Seishirou angrily reminded Ruka that they were supposed to lead the clan together, just like her late father wanted, and their marriage was supposed to help unite everyone. But before he could even finish, Ruka's high heel suddenly came crashing toward his face, and the blow sent Seishirou down hard in front of all the guards, and she did not stop there because Ruka pressed her heel against his cheek and humiliated him right there on the floor, and she called him weak, untalented, and completely useless to her, and she even mocked their marriage, making it painfully clear that she despised being married to a weak human. And then, still furious, Ruka raised her leg again, preparing to deliver another brutal kick to the helpless man, but before she could do it, Matsura came running into the room, and the young girl screamed at her mother to stop, and tears filled her eyes as she desperately begged Ruka to come to her senses and stop hurting her father, and she could not understand why her mother had become this cruel, and Matsura remembered how happy they all used to be together, with their family laughing and spending time together before everything changed, and with tears streaming down her face, she begged her mother to become that kind and loving woman again, the mother she remembered from before all this hatred took over, and hearing her daughter's desperate plea, Ruka slowly walked toward the girl who was standing there waiting for her mother to hug her, and then Ruka pulled Matsura into a warm embrace, and for a moment, it actually looked like her daughter's words got through to her, and Matsura smiled with relief, believing that her loving mother had finally come back. But that smile did not last because suddenly, Matsura started coughing up blood, and she was completely stunned because hidden behind the hug, Ruka had driven a sharp blade straight into her own daughter's body, and the entire room went dead silent, and Ruka was still holding the bloody dagger while Matsura stood frozen in unbearable pain, and she looked up at her mother with tears in her eyes, unable to understand why she would do something like this. And Ruka did not even hesitate because she pulled the blade back out and let her own daughter collapse onto the living room floor, bleeding badly, and Seishirou watched the nightmare unfold with his eyes wide open, completely frozen and unable to process what he just witnessed. But Ruka showed absolutely no remorse because she calmly wiped the blood from her hand and smiled like a complete monster. And then she casually revealed the reason she killed her own daughter, which was that her new lover did not want a woman who came with baggage, and Matsura lay helplessly on the floor as her life slowly slipped away, and her final breaths were weak and painful, and meanwhile, Seishirou's mind filled with memories of his daughter smiling, playing, and helping around the house, and now right in front of him, that beloved little girl was dying. Something inside him completely snapped because Seishirou let out a deafening scream filled with pure grief and rage, and fueled by that fury, he somehow broke free from the guards holding him down and sent both of them flying, and he immediately charged forward, screaming that Matsura was Ruka's daughter too and that there was absolutely no excuse for what she had done. And Seishirou rushed toward his daughter's body, desperate to reach her and comfort her during her final moments. But before he could get anywhere near her, Kuki Shishio stepped directly onto Matsura's body, and he deliberately blocked Seishirou from getting closer, standing between the grieving father and his dying daughter like he owned the place, and Kuki looked down at him with pure arrogance, making it clear that he would not let Seishirou do a single thing, and then a terrifying purple aura suddenly surrounded Kuki, taking the shape of a massive skull and revealing the overwhelming power this man possessed, and Seishirou gritted his teeth as sweat ran down his face, and he had already lost his daughter, and now he was being forced to stand there and take this humiliation, and Seishirou stared at Kuki with pure hatred burning in his eyes, and right then, he made himself a promise that one day he was going to get revenge on Kuki Shishio for everything he just did, and Kuki casually adjusted his glasses with a smug little smile, showing absolutely zero sympathy for the devastated father standing in front of him, and then suddenly, sirens exploded outside, and Seishirou froze completely caught off guard, and red and blue police lights began flashing through the windows, and he could not understand who called the authorities to this house, and desperate, Seishirou turned toward Ruka and begged her to at least surrender and tell the police what she did, but Ruka's face twisted into an evil mocking grin because apparently, the idea of her turning herself in was hilarious to her. And she stepped right over her own daughter's body and pointed the blame straight at Seishirou, claiming that he was the one responsible for what happened to Matsura, and before Seishirou could even react, the police smashed through the door, and 2 officers rushed inside with their weapons drawn, shouting for everyone to put their hands up and stay where they were. But then Seishirou noticed something terrifying because those guns were not pointed at Ruka, but they were aimed directly at him, and Seishirou was completely stunned, and he immediately started shouting that he did not do anything and had nothing to do with his daughter's death, but Ruka calmly walked over and leaned toward him, whispering something cold enough to make his blood run cold because she told him that this was exactly why having power mattered, and you could use it to bend the truth until everyone believed whatever you wanted. And that was when Seishirou finally understood that this whole thing was planned and he had been framed from the very start. And Ruka reminded him that her father was dead now, meaning there was nobody left powerful enough to protect Seishirou from the influence of the Oni family, and Kuki and Ruka stayed behind the police, making sure Seishirou had no chance of getting anyone from the clan to hear his side of the story, and Seishirou's eyes filled with tears as the horrifying reality sank in because he was completely trapped, and false accusations were about to destroy his entire life. And in a desperate last attempt to save himself, Seishirou reached across the floor and grabbed his phone, hoping he could preserve whatever evidence might still prove his innocence, and then he suddenly took off running because he bolted toward the exit while the officers and the 2 villains simply watched him flee, and Ruka casually raised her hand and gave him a mocking goodbye wave, and then the officers opened fire, and gunshots tore through the room one after another, echoing through the house as multiple bullets slammed into Seishirou's back while he was running for his life, and the shots completely wrecked his balance, and he finally collapsed unconscious. The guards looked down and confirmed that somehow he was still breathing despite taking all those bullets, and one officer raised his gun and aimed directly at Seishirou's head, and as Seishirou lay there barely conscious, his mind went back to his daughter, remembering just how fragile she was, and the guard asked if he should finish the job with one final shot, but Ruka immediately stopped him and said wait, and she grabbed Seishirou by the hair and brutally pulled him up, already having a much more twisted idea for how she wanted him to suffer, and barely hanging on to consciousness, Seishirou could only pray that somehow someone would save his beloved daughter. Then through the darkness, he heard a voice calling his name, and Seishirou's eyes suddenly opened. And as his vision slowly returned, he realized the guards were holding him right at the edge of a massive cliff, and when he looked down, he saw an absolutely gigantic crater stretching into darkness, and far below, dangerous creatures roamed through the depths, waiting for anything unfortunate enough to fall down there, and it was basically a death trap. And Ruka looked down at him with a sadistic smile and explained her plan that she was going to throw him into the dungeon and let the monsters finish him off so completely that not even his body would remain. But she was not done humiliating him yet because Ruka told him that society would remember him as a monster, the father who supposedly harmed his own daughter. And she leaned close to his ear and whispered one final cruel insult before deciding it was time to get rid of him for good. And then without the slightest bit of mercy she shoved her own husband over the edge, and Seishirou dropped straight into the endless darkness, and Ruka watched him fall and burst into a satisfied twisted laugh, enjoying every second of what she believed was his certain death. And as Seishirou plummeted deeper into the dungeon, regret overwhelmed him because he thought about his late father-in-law and apologized for failing him, and then he thought about Matsura, and with tears pouring from his eyes, he begged his beloved daughter for forgiveness, and a moment later, his body crashed onto the cavern floor completely covered in blood, and Seishirou lay motionless in a pool of his own blood, barely clinging to consciousness as his life seemed to be slipping away. But then something moved in the darkness because a mysterious figure wearing a red hood emerged from the shadows and silently observed Seishirou's dying body. And the hooded figure silently moved closer while Seishirou lay sprawled across the cavern floor, barely able to hold back his groans of pain, and he forced his eyes open and tried to figure out where he ended up, and after looking around, he realized the horrifying truth that he did not just fall into some random part of the dungeon because he landed on the deepest and most dangerous floor of the entire place, and then without warning, the green crystal embedded in his hands suddenly started glowing, and a bright mystical energy spread through his body as a skill window appeared in front of him, and it revealed that an emergency ability had activated, giving him exactly 1 extra hour before his death. And Seishirou stared at his glowing hand and remembered why his body was in such terrible shape, because it had been 10 years since he retired, and back when he was still active, he had been an A-rank hunter, someone who regularly risked his life inside these dungeons. And he remembered how he first became an adventurer because his mother needed expensive medical treatment. So Seishirou had no choice but to enter the dungeons and make whatever money he could, and he fought magical beasts and gigantic monsters, even venturing into the deepest, most dangerous floors just to earn enough to pay for her treatment. But after 10 years away from that life, his body had become far weaker than it used to be, and suddenly, something slipped from his suit pocket and hit the cavern floor beside him. And Seishirou looked down and realized it was Matsura's broken phone. The same phone that had been left behind during the horrific chaos at their home, and the sight of it instantly brought everything back, including Ruka's cruel face, that twisted smile, and the moment his daughter was taken from him, and Seishirou gripped the phone tightly with both hands as his emotions finally overwhelmed him, and tears rolled down his face while he desperately apologized to Matsura for failing to protect her. And a soft alarm suddenly came from the phone, and Seishirou froze because he looked at the screen, in confusion, wondering why an alarm would be going off at a time like this, and then a memory suddenly came rushing back because he remembered Matsura smiling at him and explaining that she had used the exact same password as her father because she was afraid she would forget the numbers, and Seishirou stared at the phone, realizing there might still be something on it that he had not discovered yet. Seishirou carefully entered the password, hoping there might be something useful hidden inside the Notes app, and his bloody fingers trembled as he tapped the cracked screen and entered the numbers, and the phone unlocked, and the phone lit up, and the Notes app was sitting right there at the top, and Seishirou quickly opened it, expecting to find random messages or little diary entries from his daughter. But instead he got hit with a nightmare because the notes revealed that Matsura had been suffering horribly at school, and she had also been mistreated by members of the clan's own guard. And somehow she had kept all of it hidden from her father, and then he discovered something even worse because the notes explained that her own mother had physically abused her after Matsura suffered another terrible incident within the clan, leaving the girl even more broken. And her final entry was basically an apology, revealing just how hopeless and alone she had felt while silently dealing with everything by herself. And Seishirou's eyes filled with tears because he finally understood what his daughter had been going through behind his back, and he never once noticed, and the phone slipped from his trembling hands and hit the ground, and Seishirou dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by guilt, and he slammed his fists against the cavern floor and screamed, asking himself why he never realized his daughter was suffering right in front of him, and the guilt completely destroyed him because he felt like he was the one who failed her, the one who should have protected her but was too blind to see what was happening. And alone at the bottom of the abyss, Seishirou kept crying as the darkness around him grew heavier, and then he noticed that they were not alone because massive beasts with razor-sharp teeth began surrounding him from every direction. And Seishirou barely reacted because his mind was completely consumed by guilt as the monsters slowly closed in, and he broke down again, begging Matsura's spirit to forgive him for being such a failure and for realizing everything far too late. And one of the beasts suddenly opened its enormous jaws above him, ready to swallow him whole and finally end his suffering. But just before it could strike, a mysterious voice cut through the darkness and said, "Wake up," and the beast suddenly froze, and then another command followed, calling Seishirou a servant and completely stopping the monster's attack, and a mysterious girl wearing a red hood now stood directly in front of him, and even the gigantic beasts surrounding them were frozen in midair as if time itself had stopped. And the girl calmly looked down at the injured Seishirou while the terrifying atmosphere of the dungeon remained completely still around them, and Seishirou was stunned and barely awake, but he forced himself to speak and asked who she was, and the mysterious girl seemed amused by his question because instead of taking offense, she playfully commented on how rude his first greeting was, and then she let out a soft laugh, and the girl slowly pulled her hood down, revealing a confident smile and a pair of glowing red eyes, and she said her real name was Alana, and she calmly introduced herself as a powerful vampire, and Seishirou just stared at her completely confused because a legendary vampire was standing right in front of him. and he had no idea how this was even possible. And then suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his head, and Seishirou groaned as strange memories began flooding his mind. But these were not his memories because he saw a little white-haired girl unconscious on a beach where a group of local villagers eventually discovered her, and a kind couple took the helpless child in, fed her, and treated her like family, and for a while, the girl lived a peaceful and happy life, and she smiled innocently, even showing her tiny fangs without having the slightest clue about the nightmare waiting for her. And then everything changed because one terrible day, the girl's peaceful new home was attacked, and cruel demons invaded the village and slaughtered the very people who had welcomed her with nothing but kindness. And the little girl desperately tried to fight back, but one of the monsters landed a brutal hit straight into her stomach, and the demons kept attacking her without any mercy, and eventually, they left her beaten, bloody, and barely conscious on the ground, and then they threw her into a massive crater, and the little girl plunged into the darkness below, just like Seishirou did. But instead of giving up, she filled with uncontrollable hatred, and she swore that one day she would destroy every demon responsible for ruining her life. And the vision suddenly ended, and Seishirou snapped back to reality completely shaken by everything he just saw. And Ilana casually wiped the blood from her finger and explained what happened because Seishirou was able to see her memories since he had consumed some of her blood while being brought back from the brink of death. And the vampire looked upward and explained that she knew exactly what it felt like to be betrayed and thrown into an abyss by demons because she went through the same pain a long time ago. And Ilana then sat down casually in front of Seishirou, and an unexpected connection began forming between these two people who had both been consumed by revenge. And she held up his daughter's broken phone and told him she understood his pain, and she knew exactly how much hatred he felt toward his ex-wife after everything she took from him. And then Ilana gave him a suspicious, almost playful smile because she clearly had something else in mind, and Seishirou stared back at her with pure rage in his eyes, remembering his daughter, his family, and everything that was ripped away from him. And Ilana finally reached out her hand and offered him a deal that the two of them could join forces and take revenge on everyone who destroyed their lives. And Seishirou looked away completely defeated and told her it was impossible because the demons were simply too powerful. And Seishirou remembered just how strong Ruka was because even high-ranked hunters would not stand a chance against an influential Oni like her. And then he noticed something because Ilana's hand was badly injured and still bleeding, and after saving his life, the vampire looked down at the wound and casually explained that she got hurt a little while protecting him from the magical beasts, but she also made something clear that despite being a vampire, her current strength was severely limited, and if they stayed here much longer, the monsters in this cave were going to tear both of them apart. And that was when Ilana offered him a dangerous deal because she could create a mystical pact that would give Seishirou enough power to crush his ex-wife, but there was a brutal price because he would only have 1 year to live. And Ilana warned him that every time he pushed the pack's power during battle, he would burn through that remaining lifespan even faster, and she extended her blood-covered hand toward him, and then she gave him a choice because he could die here like a helpless nobody, or he could face his fate head-on, and Ilana challenged him to accept the pact and be reborn as something closer to a true demon, completely focused on getting his revenge. And Seishirou's expression changed because there was something almost unhinged in his eyes now, and he accepted. And without even hesitating, Seishirou grabbed Ilana's hand and sealed the pact, fully aware that he could be sacrificing his own life for revenge, and he even accepted the blood ritual willingly, putting his very soul on the line if that was what it took to avenge his daughter. Suddenly, a violent burst of blue energy erupted through his body, and his entire existence began changing in seconds. And Seishirou screamed as an overwhelming force wrapped around him, restoring his damaged body and bringing his strength back to life. And Ilana watched the transformation and warned him that being reborn through the pact came with unimaginable brutal pain. But Seishirou refused to care because he gritted his teeth and insisted that it did not hurt. And tears of pure despair ran down his face as he said that whatever pain his body felt was nothing compared to what his daughter suffered. And then Ilana suddenly sensed something approaching because the magical beasts had found them, and a whole pack was closing in, and Seishirou immediately stepped in front of Ilana, his hand already crackling with blue energy, and he told her to stay back. And then he started walking toward the monsters completely unbothered by the army of beasts waiting for him because falling into the depths did not scare him anymore, and Seishirou slowly clenched his fist as blue electrical energy exploded around it, and he had one thing left to accomplish, and he refused to fall before he got it done, and with pure blind rage driving him forward, Seishirou charged straight at the colossal monsters, and Seishirou swore he was going to drag every single member of that race straight into the abyss, and then he threw his punch. And the impact was absolutely devastating because a massive shockwave exploded through the dungeon, wiping out every monster caught in its path, and in an instant, the entire pack was annihilated, and Alana just stood there completely speechless because she could not even process the ridiculous amount of power Seishirou suddenly possessed, and for a moment, she seriously wondered if what she had seen was even real, and as the dust slowly cleared, Seishirou remained standing in the middle of the destruction, blue lightning crackling all over his body, and his expression was ice cold, and with an unshakable thirst for revenge, he quietly declared that he was going to hunt down every single person responsible for destroying his life, and now reborn with this terrifying new power, the former A-rank hunter declared war on the entire Oni race. And then a system window suddenly appeared because it confirmed the new pact skill which boosted the power of Seishirou's punches by a massive 200%. Meanwhile, back in the city, everything looked completely normal on the surface because the streets were packed with people going about their daily lives, completely unaware of the lies being spread by those in power, and a giant billboard played a live news report about the shocking incident that had taken over the entire city, and the reporter explained the alleged attack involving the eldest daughter of the Shinki clan. And right there on the screen was Seishirou's face because he was being portrayed as the villain, and according to the report, the girl's father was suspected of committing the horrific crime and was currently on the run, making him one of the most wanted men in the city, and then Ruka appeared on camera, and she put on the perfect performance of a devastated mother, crying fake tears and pretending to be completely heartbroken over her daughter's death, and the public ate it right up. And the report also revealed that the Shinki clan controlled a fortune worth billions, raising questions about whether some kind of internal power struggle might be behind the incident. But behind closed doors, the truth was much darker because in a hidden location, the female reporter from the broadcast was seen beaten and kneeling on the floor barely able to move, and Ruka calmly walked toward her while holding a whip because she was furious since the reporter dared to mention the Shinki family's enormous fortune during the broadcast, and the injured journalist begged Ruka for mercy, but Ruka made one thing clear, that nothing was allowed to ruin her carefully crafted image of a grieving mother, and she ignored the woman's pleas and attacked her, taking out all her anger on the helpless reporter. And afterward, Ruka looked disgusted by the mess, and she ordered her henchmen to clean everything up before heading off to wash herself, complaining about the smell, and then Kuki Shishio appeared, casually leaning against the doorway with that same smug attitude, and looking at his partner, he told her to calm down and reminded her that they needed to keep their heads straight given the current situation, and as the journalist's body was dragged away, Kuki casually dismissed the whole incident, calling the press nothing but useless trash. And Ruka walked over with a cold smile and agreed that there was no reason to waste their energy stressing over people beneath them. And the two embraced in the luxurious room, celebrating their plan working perfectly, while showing absolutely no remorse for what they had done. High above the city inside their massive luxury tower, Ruka reflected on the life she had always had because she had never known what real hardship felt like, and from the moment she was born, she had everything, including money, power, servants, expensive clothes, and every luxury imaginable, and her entire life had basically been one long vacation where someone else handled every problem for her. And whenever Ruka wanted something, servants were ready to make it happen without daring to question her orders, and now she had an equally powerful partner beside her, someone who shared the same ruthless ambitions and twisted goals. But even with all that, Ruka still felt like something was missing because she did not just want wealth, but she wanted absolute power, and Ruka wanted to control everything around her without anyone having the courage to stand against her. And now that her father was dead and her troublesome husband was finally out of the way, she believed every obstacle standing between her and that goal had been eliminated. But there was one more little secret because even Kuki was not safe, and Ruka was already planning to throw him away once she no longer needed him, and with a twisted smile, she thought to herself that the world did not need two rulers sitting on top because there could only be one, and suddenly, Kuki's phone started vibrating in his pocket, interrupting their private moment, and he checked the call and told Ruka that he needed to step away for a while because his family had summoned him urgently, and Kuki headed toward the elevator and gave Ruka a casual wave before disappearing, and meanwhile, Ruka's trusted bodyguard remained inside the room because the man stood perfectly still, waiting for her next command, but secretly he was completely captivated by her because he spent more than 18 years serving and protecting Ruka, and his admiration for her had only grown stronger over time, and to him, she still looked absolutely perfect, and the bodyguard even wiped away tears of emotion, overwhelmed by the fact that he had been allowed to remain at his beloved Ruka's side for all these years. And then Ruka called his name, and he immediately snapped back to attention and stepped forward, ready to obey whatever order she gave. And Ruka did not waste a second because she ordered him to accompany her to the grand hall where the main event was about to begin, and the bodyguard immediately straightened up, his expression turning completely serious because protecting Ruka was not just another job to him, but it was basically his entire purpose, and he bowed with one hand pressed against his chest and promised that he would carry out her order with absolute loyalty and respect. And deep down, he made himself another promise that if protecting Ruka meant risking his own life, then so be it. And soon they arrived at the entrance of the grand hall, and a sign outside revealed exactly what the event was for, which was an official memorial ceremony honoring the young girl who died, and inside, the massive hall was packed with members of the Oni clan, all gathered for the ceremony taking place on the main stage, and Ruka stepped up to the microphone, and behind her was a large picture of Matsura, and she began talking about her late father, claiming that he always believed humans and Oni should live together in peace and harmony. And then she delivered the biggest lie of the night because Ruka told everyone that her daughter was tragically killed by a cruel human, and she lowered her head and put on the perfect grieving mother act, pretending she was barely holding herself together, and the audience immediately fell for it because people looked devastated, believing every fake tear and every word coming out of her mouth, but hidden behind her hair, Ruka quietly let out a sinister little laugh because she was enjoying every second of this performance. And then her voice suddenly became louder because Ruka declared that the dream of peace was over, and she celebrated the deaths of her father and her so-called troublesome husband, acting like both of them were nothing more than obstacles standing in her way, and her eyes burned with ambition as she turned toward the Oni gathered in the hall, and then she made her declaration that a new era was beginning, one where the Oni race would stand above everyone else and hold absolute power, and the crowd erupted because they started cheering wildly and chanting Ruka's name throughout the entire hall, and Ruka's smile grew wider because this was exactly what she had always wanted, which was power, attention, and the fanatical worship of an entire crowd, and she spread her arms on the stage, soaking in the applause like she had already won. But then, a wave of dark blue energy suddenly tore through the hall, and the cheering instantly died, and everyone froze, confused by the terrifying pressure that had just invaded the room, and then someone appeared behind Ruka, and it was Seishirou, and his eyes were glowing with intense blue energy, and Ruka turned around and went completely pale, and she barely had time to react because Seishirou drove a devastating punch straight into his ex-wife's face in the middle of her speech, and the impact sent Ruka flying across the hall, and she crashed through tables and sent glass goblets scattering everywhere before slamming hard onto the floor, and the entire ceremony erupted into chaos, and Ruka grabbed her bruised cheek and screamed in fury because she could not believe someone actually dared to strike her. After all, even her own father never laid a hand on her. But when Ruka finally looked up, she completely froze because she recognized the man standing on the stage, and it was Seishirou, and he was dressed sharply in a suit, looking nothing like the broken man she threw into the abyss, and he casually straightened his clothes and looked down at her with a dark grin, and then he dropped a brutal insult by saying that Ruka had gotten pretty ugly since the last time he saw her, and Seishirou stood proudly in the center of the stage while Ruka lay there bruised and bleeding in front of the entire clan, and with a cold smile, he introduced himself to everyone and announced that he had finally returned from the nightmare they thought had killed him, and the entire audience went pale, and some of them were literally sweating in fear, and nobody could believe it because the human they watched fall into the abyss was standing right there alive, and Ruka's body trembled as she stared at Seishirou because she remembered throwing him into that crater herself, yet somehow, he was standing tall with an overwhelming power radiating from his body, but her fear did not last long because it slowly turned into a twisted smile, and Ruka started laughing and clapping sarcastically, mocking Seishirou for showing up in the middle of her daughter's memorial ceremony, and she got back on her feet and looked at him with complete insanity, and then she compared him to a disgusting cockroach, saying she was amazed that such a pathetic man managed to survive the fall. But even Ruka could not hide her confusion because she wondered how he was still alive and why he suddenly looked so much younger than before, and before Seishirou could answer, several armed guards surrounded him on the stage, and Ruka confidently told him that coming back was pointless because he was only going to get destroyed again, and one of her guards suddenly charged forward, attempting to catch Seishirou off guard with a surprise punch, and Seishirou did not even flinch because his eyes calmly followed the attack, and at the last second, he moved his arm and effortlessly blocked the punch, and then he sent the bodyguard crashing into the floor in less than a second, and the entire hall went dead silent, and Ruka and the other clan members stared in horror because that guard did not even stand a chance, and Seishirou slowly looked around at everyone surrounding him, and his voice turned cold and terrifying as he ordered them to get out of his way, and Ruka's expression twisted with rage, and she immediately ordered all of her henchmen to attack together and crush Seishirou once and for all, and the guards charged forward as the tension inside the hall reached its breaking point, and then suddenly, a blinding light flooded the entire event hall, and in just a few seconds, every single guard in the place dropped like a sack of bricks, knocked out cold on the floor without anyone even seeing the hit, and Ruka started shaking hard, equal parts dread and pure rage, and when it hit her, she was left standing there completely unprotected in front of her ex-husband, and desperate, she screamed for her personal bodyguard, ordering him to move and save her right now, but when she looked down, she was shocked to see even Amatsukawa was already laid out, defeated on the floor, and her strongest protector was unconscious and useless, and he could not lift a finger against him, and the whole hall turned into a total scene of destruction with dozens of her henchmen sprawled out, and Ruka was left isolated with nothing between her and the danger, and she trembled harder, wondering if her ex had turned into some kind of immortal invincible monster after all this time. And Seishirou brought up an ancient legend, pointing out that not even the most powerful demons could dodge their own fate, and Ruka stumbled backward terrified, thinking she had been poisoned, while he explained he did not use any poison on her, and the young man grabbed her bruised face with ice-cold hands and made it clear he wanted to put her through something far worse than that, and he glanced at all the fallen demons around them and promised every last one of that race was going to pay for what they had done, and with a dark sinister look, he told his ex-wife that from this second on, she was going to live through a real living nightmare on Earth, and he pinned her hard to the floor right under Matsura's portrait, forcing her to stare up at the image of the girl she destroyed, and overcome with pure hatred, Ruka screamed and powered up her hand, trying to launch one last desperate strike, and she drove her claw straight into the young man's chest with everything she had, and Ruka cracked a nasty victorious smile, thinking she had finally finished her ex-husband for good with that hit, but the smile died the second she realized Seishirou did not even flinch from the claws buried in his chest, and he grabbed her arm with overwhelming force and started crushing her limbs without a single ounce of mercy, and Ruka let out a high-pitched blood-curdling scream as Seishirou tightened his grip and calmly commented on the same wicked hand she had used to commit all that evil, and he held her already broken wrist like it was nothing, his face completely serene while he thought about every atrocity she pulled, and looking up at his daughter's portrait, he reminded her those were the exact hands that snuffed out the young girl's life, and Ruka sobbed and screamed in pure despair as the bones in her hand got crushed under his overwhelming strength. And Ruka howled over her ruined, twisted fingers while Seishirou mocked her with zero compassion, telling her the beauty of those hands was gone for good, and then the hunter grabbed her other arm, ready to do the same thing all over again, and he crushed Ruka's second arm without hesitation, making her roar in agony so loud it echoed across the entire banquet hall, and completely broken and on her knees, Ruka cried out her ex-husband's name through tears, shaking with fear, and humiliated beyond words. She gritted her teeth and begged him to stop the torture right now, and Seishirou stayed dead silent, just listening to her wails and desperate pleas on the floor, and he stared down at her with those terrifying red eyes and asked what she thought she was saying, and Ruka lost her breath, her eyes going wide as she felt the suffocating murderous aura pouring off him, and she trembled with dread, recognizing that face belonged to the same man she had once humiliated and betrayed, and she remembered when he used to be a naive, gentle kid. But that sweet version of him was dead and gone forever, and in pure shock, she realized the man in front of her had turned into a true demon incarnate, driven by nothing but pure vengeance, and cold sweat broke out all over her as the dread of death crept closer, and she knew she was about to pay for every crime, and she bit her lips hard and frantically searched for any way out of his overwhelming fury, and Ruka pressed her head against the floor, begging for forgiveness and swearing she could not die in this place no matter what, and she cried and started blaming everyone else, promising she would do anything if he just spared her miserable life, and desperate, she lied through her teeth, claiming the Kuki clan forced her into those crimes and she had no choice but to obey, and Seishirou answered by brutally kicking his ex-wife square in the face with the sole of his shoe, shutting down every one of her lies. And the overwhelming kick launched her straight into the wall hard enough to make the whole hall shake from the impact. And bleeding against the wall, Ruka begged for mercy again, reminding him she had already apologized for what she did in the past. And Seishirou yanked a fistful of her hair hard and demanded to know why she murdered her own daughter if she was going to beg for forgiveness this cowardly now, and dark as the abyss. He told her he changed his mind because he was going to make her suffer every single second until she finally paid for everything, and his eyes burning with pure hatred. He said he was destroying his ex-wife, right here, right this second, and that was when Amatsukawa suddenly charged in, launching a desperate attack to try and protect Ruka, and the collision was so violent it launched the guard like a rocket into the wall, smashing the structure and raining debris everywhere. And through the smoke and rubble, the bodyguard forced his feet back under him, and still shaking off the hit, he dropped into a fighting stance, thinking saving this woman would score him a massive reward. And the second he heard Ruka call his name, he turned all flustered, thinking he had finally got her attention, but instead, she cracked a furious kick straight into his head, yelling that he took way too long to jump into the fight. And she ordered him to help her while she realized the sedative in the drinks was not strong enough to drop his body, and Ruka stayed puzzled, trying to figure out why only this one guard managed to resist the sedative that wiped out everyone else in the hall, and she ignored the detail and ordered the henchman to follow her to another room, while Seishirou just stood there, and Ruka walked right up to the young man leaning against the broken wall and mocked him for even daring to face her, and furious at her ex-husband's silence, she drove a vicious kick into his chest and hurled insults at him, and Ruka broke into a twisted smile, thinking the whole situation had just flipped completely in her favor, and right then, she told Amatsukawa to drag him out of there, revealing she had some truly cruel plans ready for her ex, and she guaranteed she was going to make the young man live through a real living nightmare. And while Seishirou got ready to speak, the hunter locked eyes with her and asked one more time what the real reason was for taking their daughter's life. And Ruka answered with a mocking tone, reminding him she had already said straight up she did not want to carry any baggage from the past. And Seishirou lowered his head and stated firmly that was not the only reason for the crime, and he revealed the girl's death was a straight demand from the Kuki clan so the marriage to Leon could even happen, and he laid it out clearly that Matsura was the real deal, the legitimate daughter carrying the official Shinki family bloodline from the original couple, and Leon did not have any kids of his own. So that girl's existence was going to be a huge problem in the power struggles down the line with the rival clan, and the young man added that Ruka was already past the age where she could produce a new heir, so the odds of her having another child were basically zero, and that was why she went and destroyed her own husband and her own daughter, just to prove how completely loyal and submissive she was to her new allies. And Ruka cracked a cold, nasty smile when she realized her ex-husband had figured out the whole twisted plan. And she laughed like a maniac and confirmed every bit of it with pure pride, bragging that she made absolutely sure to end her own daughter with her own two hands, and the unhinged woman declared she was not stopping at controlling the Kuki clan because she was going to make every human and demon on the planet kneel at her feet. And Ruka mocked Seishirou's deduction, saying Leon only wanted the girl dead to seal the family alliance. And the second Leon's name came up, the young man whispered the villain's name under his breath with his head still down, and Ruka spun around and ordered Amatsukawa to finish him off right then and there, but she was shocked when her own bodyguard's hand clamped over her mouth, and the protector pinned her against the wall and told her to stay quiet before she dug herself any deeper, and Amatsukawa kept her locked in place and warned her that the two of them were being recorded, pointing straight at the little micro camera glowing on Seishirou's vest, and Seishirou just sat there calm as can be with a recording light on, and proof that every single word of the villain's confession had been captured clean, and the hunter looked up with a confident grin and said the bodyguard had finally noticed the trap, and Ruka's eyes went wide with pure panic as she asked if the whole conversation was recorded, and Seishirou confirmed it without missing a beat. And he admitted he let himself get thrown into that room on purpose so he could stream the confession, live over the internet. And Seishirou stood up looking like he had already won, and told her the tragic mother act was over because it was time for everyone to see her real face as a cold-blooded criminal, and Ruka started shaking with rage and pure despair as it hit her that her entire reputation and plan had just been torched for good, and he tossed the phone up in the air and mocked her, asking what was going to happen once that video of all her secrets got dropped online, and completely cornered, Ruka swallowed her pride and asked in a shaky voice what the hunter wanted in exchange for not leaking the recording, and with a dark intimidating look, Seishirou took his sweet time before laying out his demand, and he looked his ex-wife up and down, eyes locked on the fancy outfit she was wearing, and then he made his first humiliating order by telling her to take all of it off right here, right now, every last piece. And Ruka's eyes widened because she was completely stunned, and she asked what he had just said, and Seishirou did not even bother answering because he casually pulled over a chair, sat down, crossed one leg over the other, folded his arms, and stared at her like he had all day, and he said, "Come on, let's go," and his expression was cold enough to make the entire room uncomfortable, and Ruka immediately snapped and asked why she had to do that. And Seishirou took out the phone and turned the camera toward her and said if this video got out, she was finished, and he reminded her exactly what was on that recording because the video clearly captured Ruka openly declaring that she was not satisfied with simply controlling the Kuki family, and she had proudly claimed that eventually both the Oni and humans would kneel before her, and Seishirou looked at her with a mocking smile and told her to think about what would happen when everyone saw that. And he warned her that the Oni would not simply forgive her after hearing those words, and the humans would not be any kinder, especially once they realized she was a dangerous criminal who could face the harshest penalty, and he then gave her a cold stare and asked if she was okay with that, and Ruka remained frozen, staring down at her clothes while realizing just how badly she had been cornered, and Seishirou let out a quiet sigh and said he understood. And then he turned toward Amatsukawa and told him to grab her and bring her over here and let him handle this. And Amatsukawa looked completely stunned and asked if he seriously wanted him to do that even if his beloved lady got hurt. And Seishirou calmly raised the phone again, showing him the recording, and asked if he was refusing his order. And he paused and said that if he did not cooperate, his beloved lady could be the one who got hurt. And Amatsukawa stared at the phone, realizing that Seishirou had Ruka completely trapped. And Seishirou's voice dropped low and cold as he stared down Amatsukawa and said he only removed the sedative from his system for a moment like this. So he told him to go on and move, and Amatsukawa's eyes went wide, and shock hit first, then pure anger and frustration, and his jaw locked so tight you could hear his teeth grind, and in one desperate motion he grabbed both of Ruka's wrists and held them tight, trying to keep her from doing anything reckless. And Ruka was already screaming at him, thrashing with her face twisted with rage, and she kept yelling, but Amatsukawa just held on with his voice cracking as he begged and said he could not, madam, because he gave him the sedative and it was only temporary, and Ruka kept screaming over him, still fighting, and that was when Seishirou's expression changed into that slow, unsettling little smile that spread across his face, and his eyes looked almost sinister, and he said now then, time for the reveal. And he stepped in and tore at her outfit, and Ruka's scream went higher with pure fury and humiliation mixed together, and it was the kind of moment that felt almost too satisfying after everything she had done, because the same woman who had watched her own daughter get bullied and assaulted by people she controlled and who had stayed quiet the whole time even though she knew every detail, now she was the one standing there exposed being recorded. And Ruka's voice cracked as she snarled at him and said not to look because this was not for someone like him to see, and Seishirou just tossed the torn pieces aside and kept the camera steady and asked if she was shy seriously because he was still technically her husband and asked if she had forgotten already, and her face went bright red with rage and she said that anyone who was not an Oni was beneath her and he was worse than beneath her and she had never once thought of him as her husband. And Seishirou's smile did not move because he said, oh, so she married the guy who was worse than beneath her and told her not to get so mad she would ruin that pretty face. And he kept the camera rolling, making sure every torn edge was captured. And Ruka hissed under her breath that he did not need to film this. And then Amatsukawa's voice cut in, low and stunned, as he stared at her and said he had never seen her like this before and she was more striking than he thought and that scent was strong. And he could see it hitting him hard because his breathing got heavier and his whole body tensed up, and Ruka's eyes went huge and she spun on him, screaming pure venom and calling him a filthy traitor and telling him to get away from her, and Amatsukawa's face flushed with sweat starting to show and he stammered and said, Madam, please forgive him because he could not help it, and Seishirou watched the whole thing with open amusement, camera still rolling. And he glanced over at Amatsukawa with his voice almost casual and asked if he wanted her and said he bet he would enjoy it, and Amatsukawa's head snapped up and he asked what he had just said, and Seishirou's whole presence changed because a freezing heavy aura rolled off him as pure anger settled into his voice, and he repeated himself slow and cold and asked if he did not want to be with her because that was what he was asking him. And Ruka screamed at him with her face twisted and told him not to mess with her like he would actually do it because he was a low-level nobody, and Seishirou's unsettling smile did not fade because he said actually he made him do it and her bodyguard drank the wrong formula so now he was definitely going to lose control, and he held up a small vial with blue energy flickering from his hand around it and said it was a special compound and he had already consumed it so now he was definitely going to act on it. And Ruka's voice cracked higher and she said there was no way something like that existed, and Seishirou shrugged still calm and said they existed in legend and ones with those kinds of effects and she would not know since she was not an adventurer, and she said he was lying and that something like that, but she never finished because Amatsukawa suddenly lost control and grabbed her and slammed her down onto the floor and pinned both her wrists with one hand, and the position was extremely awkward, and anyone watching could understand exactly what was about to happen. And Ruka screamed at him and asked what he was doing, and Amatsukawa's voice came out strained, almost broken as he begged for forgiveness and said he could not control himself and it was the formula's effect, and pure fear and shock flooded Ruka's face as the situation spiraled completely out of her control, and she screamed again loud, and then something shifted on her face because the fear was still there but mixed with something else, and her expressions gave it away, and Seishirou never stopped recording, his phone steady the whole time. And when it finally ended, that same unsettling smile stretched wider, and he said caught on camera and he had captured all of this, and a little while later, the two of them were screaming at him still messed up from what just happened, and Seishirou turned to Amatsukawa and dark blue energy exploded from his body, and the pressure was suffocating, and Amatsukawa's face went pale with sweat pouring down as he scrambled backward and asked what he was planning to do. And Seishirou lifted his foot, and Amatsukawa begged instantly and told him to stop and leave him alone, and Seishirou placed his foot right in the mess Amatsukawa had made earlier because the guy had been so scared he had completely lost control of himself right there, and Seishirou's shoe rested just a little away from the most vulnerable spot, and any closer and you could imagine the poor bodyguard would never become a father in his life, and he was absolutely terrified because he had already made a complete mess of himself. And Seishirou casually tossed the empty vial aside, and said there was no such formula and he was lying because if something like that actually existed in the legends, even you guys would have heard of it. And Ruka's voice exploded raw and furious and she said he had been messing with her for so long, and Seishirou did not even let her finish because he stepped in and drove a heavy punch straight into her face, and the impact turned her already bruised features into something unrecognizable, and she flew backward and slammed hard onto the floor. And his voice came out low in pure anger and he said he could do whatever he wanted, and he glared down at her with eyes burning and said she used her own daughter for her own selfish desires, so was not she the one who had been messing around, and he looked ready to go again, and Ruka just glared back from the floor still in her torn clothes breathing hard, and then Seishirou's phone gave a small buzz, and he checked it, his expression shifting, and he said time limit is over, and he looked straight at her and said now he was going to have them do exactly as he said. And she said like she would ever listen to someone like him, and he said if she was okay with the video and photos getting leaked and if people saw that disgraceful behavior, the Kuki family would not let her live either, and Ruka finally snapped and asked what he actually wanted from her, and Seishirou looked at her calmly and said 3 things, and actually 3 promises, And first, she did not harm anyone and no hurting each other because they stayed out of each other's way and got along. And his expression turned serious and he said the moment he found out she was involved in something she was not supposed to be, she was done. And Seishirou then turned his attention away from his demon wife. And Ruka suddenly interrupted him and said wait and asked what the third promise was. And she looked past him and froze because the unconscious guards were starting to wake up, and one of them slowly lifted his head completely confused and asked what was going on here. And another female guard nearby also started coming around looking just as confused, and Amatsukawa stared at them in disbelief and said wait, were not these people supposed to be out cold? And that was when Seishirou finally revealed his third promise because he turned around with a cool confident look and said third, let him escape. The grand hall erupts into chaos. Guards are screaming at the top of their lungs, weapons drawn. He killed one of them. Take him down. But in the center of the room, Seishirou, the MC, is completely unfazed. He casually tosses a handful of crushed sleeping pills into the air, watching the dust settle. Did you all sleep well? Seishirou asks, his voice cutting through the panic with chilling calm. You look a little tired. He stretches his arms, rolling his shoulders. Now that you're awake, care to stretch your bodies? The guards freeze, staring at him in stunned disbelief. They can't process the fact that he just casually incapacitated a squad of elite Oni guards without drawing a weapon. Seishirou drops into a sprinter's stance, a playful smirk on his face. Let's play a game, and I'm the one running away. If I lose, you can do whatever you want with me. How does that sound? Across the room, Ruka, the mother of Seishirou's daughter, stands frozen. Her jaw practically hits the floor. Before she can issue an order, Seishirou takes off like a flash. He moves like water, vaulting over banquet tables and weaving through the guards. They lunge at him from the front, but he dodges them like they're moving in slow motion. One guard actually gets close enough to grab a fistful of his hair, but Seishirou just smiles, effortlessly slipping out of the grip. Stop him! Ruka shrieks, finally finding her voice. Amatsukawa, kill him! Amatsukawa, the captain of the guard, but before he can move, Seishirou's eyes snap wide open. The pupils vanish, replaced by a glowing, ethereal white. He has unlocked his peak state. The air around him distorts. It's the look of a man about to do something completely unhinged. Suddenly, Amatsukawa pivots. Instead of attacking Seishirou, he grabs a fellow Oni guard and pins him to the floor. You bastard! What are you doing? The pinned guard roars. You're a guard. I'm not doing this because I want to. Amatsukawa grunts, struggling to hold him down. Hurry up and kill him, a female guard screams. Ruka backhands the female guard so hard she spins to the floor. Ruka's eyes are wild. Listen to me closely, she screams at her remaining men. I forbid any of you from touching him. Even Seishirou pauses mid-stride, glancing back to listen to her unhinged speech. Could that appearance be that man? The slapped guard whispers in terror. Kill him. Kill that bastard. The rest of the guards scream, ignoring Ruka. Are you defying my orders? Ruka shrieks. Amidst the chaos, a servant approaches Ruka with a coat. My lady, please, put on some clothes. Ruka's dress had been torn in the scuffle, but she arrogantly swats the coat away. She refuses to cover up, acting with the untouchable, haughty arrogance of an Oni princess who believes she is above mortal modesty. Protect me, she commands. But the guards are losing their minds. The bloodlust is taking over. Did the Shinki family betray us? They roar, turning their weapons on each other. The hall devolves into a brutal, chaotic brawl of Oni guards kicking and tearing each other apart with their bare hands. Seishirou just watches the carnage, laughing softly. Then, a creepy, echoing voice cuts through the noise. Quite comical, isn't it? Seishirou stops. I thought you were a man of stone, like Ishibe, he thinks. But you surprisingly have a sense of humor. He turns his head. Who's there? Ignoring the brawling guards and a screaming Ruka, Seishirou walks calmly toward the back of the hall, where a lifeless body lies. It's his daughter, Matsurika. Even in death, she looks incredibly beautiful. Ishibe steps out from the shadows. She doesn't look anything like you, the vampire notes coldly. Shut the hell up for a while, Seishirou snaps, his irritation flaring. He kneels beside his daughter, his expression softening into profound grief. You must have been so lonely, he thinks. Just hold on a little longer. Once everything is over, the two of us will be together. A high-caliber sniper bullet tears through the air and pierces straight through Seishirou's skull. The entire room drops dead silent. Ruka and Amatsukawa freeze, their eyes wide, cold sweat dripping down their faces. Seishirou's head snaps back, blood splattering across his daughter's pale cheek. Ruka looks behind her. On the balcony above, two men in military uniforms lower a sniper rifle. The elite Oni clan assassins. A hysterical, wicked laugh escapes Ruka's lips. She sounds like a witch. You foolish pig. Getting carried away like that. In the end, a pig is just a pig. She steps forward, her face twisted in triumph. How does it feel, huh? Get on your knees and apologize. Say, I'm sorry for getting carried away. But Seishirou doesn't fall. Slowly, he turns his head to look at her. His expression is terrifyingly cold, his eyes burning with absolute murder. Who exactly, Seishirou whispers, his voice echoing in the silent hall, is apologizing to whom? Before Ruka's eyes, the massive hole in his skull knits itself back together. The flesh seals. Seishirou reaches into his mouth, chews for a second. He takes a deep breath, aims his finger like a gun, and fires the bullet back with the force of a railgun. Up on the balcony, the sniper's head explodes. Ruka stares in absolute horror. Seishirou wipes the blood from his face. I have a question of my own, he says, stepping toward her. How does it feel right now? Ruka's legs give out. She drops to her knees, completely broken, realizing she is utterly outmatched. Then do you know why this monster husband isn't killing you right now? Seishirou asks, looking down at her with grim confidence. Everything you've obtained, everything you've built up, I will steal and destroy it all, just so I can kill you at the very end. He turns his back on her. We'll meet again. And when that time comes, it'll be the moment you die. Seishirou walks away, carrying his daughter's body. Behind him, Ruka completely loses her mind. She drops to the floor, sobbing hysterically as her guards rush forward to pull her up by the arms, her screams echoing through the ruined hall. The chaotic energy of the hotel is replaced by a somber, quiet tension in a high-story apartment. Seishirou and Ishibe stand over Matsuruka's body. Ishibe hands Seishirou a vial of strange, glowing red liquid. It's no good, Ishibe says softly. No matter how potent my blood is, reviving the dead is impossible. Seishirou understands. He watches Matsuruka's chest. Her complexion isn't bad, Ishibe observes. Her body is recovering, but it seems she hasn't regained consciousness. She's comatose, Seishirou murmurs. What do you intend to do with your daughter's body? Ishibe asks. You didn't risk your life and fight through an army just to cremate her, did you? Seishirou stares at his daughter, lost in thought. Suddenly, the door bursts open. I followed the scent of blood from the hotel, a smooth, arrogant voice echoes. And to think you'd still be lingering in a place like this. Seishirou turns. Standing in the doorway is a young man in a pristine uniform with a yellow tie. Kuki Shishio. It seems you've been quite cruel to my fiancé, Kuki says, his eyes locked on Seishirou. Ishibe steps forward. You're one of the pursuers? Seishirou, Ishibe mutters under his breath. To think this guy would be the one to chase us. Kuki's face twists in rage. Don't think you'll die a painless death, you bastards. He rolls his shoulders, preparing for a fight. Seishirou studies him. Kuki Shishio is 26, the young head of the Kuki family. He won Olympic gold medals at 18, graduated top of his class from a British university at 15. He is a man who has it all, made possible by being born with the largest mana crystal in the country. When Seishirou fought him in the past, the sheer pressure of Kuki's aura had been overwhelming. Even now, having drunk Eliana's blood to boost his own power, Kuki's presence is suffocating. But Seishirou cannot let him take Matsuruka. He won't lose a second time. What are you doing just standing around looking dumb? Kuki shouts. Before Seishirou can even blink, Kuki's fist connects with his face. The impact is catastrophic, sending Seishirou flying across the room and crashing through the drywall. Seishirou pulls himself out of the rubble, wiping blood from his lip. As expected of a medalist, Kuki leaps 10 meters into the air, bringing his fist down to crush Seishirou. But Seishirou isn't the same man he used to be. He sidesteps at the perfect microsecond. Kuki's fist shatters the floorboards. Realizing Seishirou has vanished, Kuki doesn't even turn around. It appears you aren't just a simple bug, Kuki sneers, raising his hand to strike backward. Well, in the end you're still just trash. Seishirou braces himself, meeting the strike. The clash of their fists creates a shockwave that shatters the apartment's windows. Both men slide back from the sheer force. To take my punch and remain standing, you're a sturdy bug, Kuki praises mockingly. Seishirou smiles, his eyes flashing with blue lightning. Don't you know? Even the smallest bug has a soul of its own. He launches forward, but Kuki blocks the strike, sliding backward. From the corner of the room, Eliana watches intently. What do you mean, even the smallest bug has a soul? She mutters. Kuki is strong. Seishirou knows it. Eliana, play your trump card, Kuki commands his ally. Wait, Seishirou interrupts, looking at Eliana. Give me your blood. Eliana blinks, confused, but tosses him a vial. Seishirou drinks it in a single gulp and vanishes. Kuki's eyes widen. I took a defensive stance? He thinks, panicked. Did my body instinctively decide I needed to block his attack? The two separate in silence. Kuki glares, deeply irritated that a non-oni is on par with him. Losing his temper, Kuki kicks Seishirou in the stomach with all his might, sending him crashing into the wall. Before Seishirou can recover, Kuki is above him, pinning him down and delivering a relentless barrage of punches to the exact same spot. It's over, Kuki spits. But Seishirou is just smiling. Laughing even. What are you laughing at? Kuki demands. For a guy calling me a bug, Seishirou grins, you seem pretty desperate. Kuki's face turns purple with rage. What did you say? Seishirou's eyes flare with blinding light. In a fraction of a second he reverses the grapple. He delivers a devastating, humiliating counterstrike, a lightning-fast, open-palmed slap directly to Kuki's backside. The sheer disrespect of the move, combined with the physical force, completely shatters Kuki's martial arts stance. The perfect Olympian stumbles forward. Seishirou bolts out the door, sprinting into the crowded city streets. Kuki, completely unhinged, chases after him. Eliana! Seishirou shouts over his shoulder. More importantly, there's something I need you to do. Seishirou dives into a dense crowd of pedestrians. He suddenly trips, falling to the ground and pointing frantically at Kuki, who is storming through the crowd. Help! This person suddenly attacked me. Seishirou cries out, playing the victim perfectly. Kuki stops, confused. What is the meaning of this? But the crowd already has their phones out. Isn't that Shishio? I saw him on TV. No way. A medalist committing assault? Isn't that bad? Stop filming me. Kuki roars, his aura flaring in anger. The sheer pressure of his mana accidentally knocks a young girl to the ground. As she falls, a creepy, shadowy slime familiar belonging to Eliana slithers out from her shadow, hissing at Kuki. The crowd turns vicious. In the end, they only see us as bugs. It's the tyranny of the elite. That's a medalist? What a letdown. Shut up. Kuki screams, losing his mind. A clean, devastating punch lands squarely on Kuki's jaw. He flies backward, smashing straight through a brick wall. The crowd gasps, completely stunned by the sudden display of superhuman power. Seishirou steps out of the dust, smiling. I've lived twice as long as you. Don't underestimate me, brat. Kuki pulls himself from the rubble, trembling with pure, unadulterated fury. Screwing around with me? I'll kill you. Seishirou looks at his furious face, then calmly pulls out his phone. Those words. Seishirou says softly, turning the screen around. Can you still say them after seeing this? On the screen, a live broadcast is playing. It shows Kuki's little sister, tied up and gagged in a dark room. Kuki freezes. The rage drains from his face, replaced by absolute, soul-crushing terror.